Week 6 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few kickers I would start this week. The first kicker, Will Lutz of the Denver Broncos. I know this year has been a little bit of a down year for Will Lutz, but this week a great matchup versus the New York Jets. I give up the most fantasy points to kickers on the season, and Will Lutz, he has failed to reach double-digit fantasy points. But this Jet team, they just can't stop anyone, and we've seen it over the last few weeks, especially Miami, where their offense was struggling all season long. They went out there, put up a good game versus Jet defense, and then the Dallas Cowboys, even though they're one of the more high-powered offenses in the league, went out there and put up a big game. Will Lutz and the Broncos traveling to London versus New York Jet team and coming off a big victory at the Philadelphia Eagles. I think this team, they're going to be in the red zone early and often. They're playing good football, obviously, as this Denver Bronco team, winning 2 in a row. And this week in London versus New York Jets, I think opportunities will be there for Will Lutz, where this Bronco team will be in the red zone a whole lot. The next kicker, Chase McLaughlin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So the first couple weeks of the season, he couldn't hit anything, it seemed like, missing even extra points as well. And now the last 3 weeks, he's gone out there and had double-digit fantasy points in each game as Chase McLaughlin. Week 3 versus the Jets, 20. Week 4 versus Philadelphia, 16. And then Week 5, a game-winning field goal to cap off the fantasy day with 12 fantasy points. So this week, a good matchup for San Francisco. This could be a mini high-scoring game between these two teams. And this Tampa Bay offense, even with Mike Evans out and even Bucky Irvin out, they went into Seattle and put 38 points on the board. So this week with San Francisco coming to town, and McLaughlin once again goes out there, and it wouldn't be surprising to me if he reaches double-digit fantasy points for the third game in a row. Next kicker, Chris Boswell of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Boswell, he was dropped in a decent amount of fantasy leagues, but he's been a solid kicker and one of the more accurate kickers of all time, especially from 50-plus yards, is Chris Boswell. So this week, a good matchup versus Cleveland, one of the better defenses in the league, a bend but don't break type of defense. But I still think Pittsburgh, they'll get their opportunities. And nowadays, a lot of these kickers, especially this season, 55, 60 yards hasn't been a problem. And Chris Boswell, like I said, one of the most accurate kickers of all time from 50-plus, fits into that category. So this week with a matchup versus Cleveland, where it could be a grinded-out type of ball game division matchup over there in the AFC North. I like Boswell as a start this week. Next kicker, Cameron Dicker of the Los Angeles Chargers. So this Charger team, a lot of guys have been dropping off over the last couple weeks. We saw the 2 offensive tackles go down. Now we saw Marion Hampton go down. We saw Najee Harris go down a few weeks ago. And this team might stall out a lot in the red zone, where it's going to be tough for them to run the football, I think, with Hassan Haskins and Kamini Vidal. Dicker, the last few games, he's definitely been quiet. Week 3 versus Denver was his last big game, 12 fantasy points. Week 4 at the Giants, 5. And Week 5 versus Washington, 6. But this week, a good matchup at the Dolphins, a good stadium to kick at. And this Dolphin team gives up the 11th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And like I said, with this offense losing some key players over the last few weeks, I think they're going to stall out in the red zone, and opportunities are going to be there for Cameron Dicker. So this week with a good matchup, an offense losing a talented running back in Hampton, definitely a start. This week, 5th and final kicker I have as a start is Nick Folk of the New York Jets. Nick Folk weekly, he's going out there, and he's put up at least 7 or more fantasy points as Nick Folk in 3 out of 5 games this season with double-digit fantasy points. He's available in over 95% of fantasy leagues as Nick Folk. This New York Jet offense, they stall out a whole lot. And even at 40 years old, 50-plus yards isn't a problem for Nick Folk. We saw it in Miami, hit a 58-yarder. And then last week versus the Dallas Cowboys, he hit a 47-yarder. So this week, matchup in London, those ball games are usually high-scoring for the most part. And the Denver Broncos, we know, one of the better defenses in the league. And a bend but don't break unit as well, where they give up the 3rd most fantasy points to kickers on the season. So like I said, a game in London, a good field to kick at. And this Denver Bronco team, they don't give up a lot of touchdowns, but they do give up a lot of field goals. So I think that plays into Nick Folk being a good start this week. So that's a few kickers I would start for Week 6 of the fantasy football season.